woman who walked out of the Bitterroot Mountains on September 14, 1902, carried no supplies, wore a man's coat over her torn dress, and would not meet anyone's eyes. Her name was Vera Holcomb, age 26, formerly of Chicago, and she had been missing for 11 days. 3 others had gone in with her. None came out. The first person to see her was a ranch hand named Martin Quist, who later testified that she appeared on the eastern trail just after dawn, moving steadily but without apparent awareness of her surroundings. He called out. She did not answer. He approached. She stopped walking but did not speak. When he asked if she was hurt, she shook her head once. When he asked where the others were, she looked at him. Not through him. The distinction mattered to Quist, who repeated this detail in 3 separate depositions, and said nothing. She would maintain that silence, with only minor exceptions, for the remaining 41 years of her life. The search party that had been combing the lower ridges for 6 days met them on the road. Vera was taken to Dr. Raymond Pelletier's office in Stevensville, examined, given water and broth, and questioned by Sheriff Howard Enderlin. The physician's report, preserved in the Ravalli County archives, notes superficial lacerations to hands and forearms, bruising consistent with falls, mild dehydration, no evidence of assault. Patient responsive to commands, but entirely non-verbal. Affect flat. Pulse steady. Enderlin's notes are more candid. Subject refuses all queries regarding the fate of her companions. Stonewalls every approach. Not hysterical. Not evasive in manner. Simply will not speak of it. The companions were identified as follows: Lawrence Holcomb, 31, Vera's husband of 4 years, a surveyor by trade; Ansel Morrow, 28, Lawrence's colleague and friend since their college days at Northwestern; and Catherine, Kate, Drury, 24, Vera's cousin, who had traveled west with the Holcombs that spring. The expedition had been Lawrence's idea. He had been contracted to map a section of the Bitterroot Range for a timber concern and had proposed making it a combined professional and recreational venture. Letters from Kate Drury to her mother, recovered later, describe her anticipation. Vera says the air alone will be worth the trouble, and Lawrence promises we'll see country few white women have ever laid eyes on. I confess I'm eager for the wildness of it. They departed Stevensville on September 3, 1902, adequately provisioned, in good weather, with local guides recommending a circuit that would take them 8 to 10 days depending on pace. Lawrence had made similar trips before. Morrow was experienced in rough country. Both women were described as healthy and capable. On September 14th, only Vera returned. The search intensified immediately. Additional men were hired. A tracker from the Salish community, a man named Peter Big Crane, was brought in and led parties to several cold camps and a scattering of supplies along a creek ravine. No bodies, no signs of violence, no graves. Vera was kept under informal supervision at the Stevensville Hotel. She ate sparingly, slept little, and acknowledged questions with nods or shakes of her head only when they concerned her immediate needs. When pressed about the location of the others, she would close her eyes. Once, when Sheriff Enderlin raised his voice, she stood and walked to the window and remained there until he left the room. A minister was brought in. She thanked him quietly and declined further conversation. A childhood friend of Lawrence's made the trip from Missoula. She received him but would say only, "I'm sorry," and nothing more. The Holcomb family, prominent in Chicago's North Side commercial class, sent Lawrence's elder brother, William, to demand answers. The confrontation took place in the hotel's sitting room on September 19th. William's own account, contained in a letter to his father, describes Vera as unnaturally composed, immune to guilt or grief, and resolute in her refusal. I believe she knows exactly what happened and has chosen concealment. Why, I cannot fathom. Kate Drury's mother arrived by rail on September 22nd and spent 4 days in Stevensville. She left without satisfaction. In a diary entry dated September 27th, she wrote, "Vera will not speak. I cannot tell if it is trauma or shame. She looks at me as though asking forgiveness, but offers no confession. My daughter is gone, and I'm given only silence. The searches continued into early October. Snowfall made higher elevations impassable. The bodies, if there were bodies, would remain hidden until spring, if they were ever found at all. Vera Holcomb was not charged with any crime. There was no evidence of wrongdoing. There was no evidence of anything. She simply would not say. She left Montana in late October, returning to Chicago under the care of a nurse hired by the Holcomb family. She would live there, in a modest apartment on Dearborn Street, supported by a trust established by her late husband's estate until her death in 1943. She never married again. She kept no close friends. She worked intermittently as a seamstress and, later, as a file clerk for an insurance concern. Those who knew her in those later years described a woman of quiet demeanor, unfailingly polite, who attended church sporadically and avoided social gatherings. She was known to read extensively, philosophy, poetry, natural history. She kept plants in her window. She once told a neighbor that she preferred the city because you can be alone among people. When asked about her past, she would say only, "I was married once. He died in the West." If pressed, she would excuse herself. In 1937, a journalist named Leonard Voss, writing a feature for the Saturday Evening Post on unsolved disappearances, tracked Vera down and requested an interview. She agreed to meet him once, in the lobby of her building. He asked if she would finally tell what happened in the Bitterroots. She looked at him for a long moment, and then said, "No." He asked why. She said, "Because it wouldn't help." He asked whom it wouldn't help. She stood, thanked him for his time, and left. Voss published the piece without her cooperation. In it, he speculated that Vera had witnessed something so horrifying that speech had become impossible. A psychological fracture. He suggested accident, perhaps a fall, perhaps panic and failed rescue. He did not suggest malice. He did not suggest guilt. Vera Holcomb died of pneumonia in March 1943, age 67, in her apartment. She was found by the building superintendent after she failed to collect her mail. No family attended the burial. Her possessions were few: clothing, books, a small wooden box containing letters from her husband, written before the expedition, and a single photograph of the four of them, Lawrence, Ansel, Kate, and Vera, taken in Stevensville the day before they departed. On the back of the photograph, in Vera's handwriting, "We were happy." She left no diary, no confession, no explanation. What she left was silence, and in that silence, the others remain. To understand what was lost, one must first understand what existed. Lawrence and Vera Holcomb were married in Chicago on April 18, 1898, in a small ceremony at St. James Episcopal. The union was regarded warmly by both families. Lawrence was the second son of a successful dry goods merchant, educated, steady, with prospects in the expanding field of land survey and civil engineering. Vera was the daughter of a school teacher and a bookkeeper, well-read, reserved, considered intelligent if somewhat serious. Letters between them during their brief courtship reveal affection of a thoughtful, undemonstrative kind. Lawrence wrote, "You have a way of listening that makes a man feel his words are worth something." Vera replied, "You do not expect me to be other than I am. That is a rare gift." They settled in a rented house on the near west side. Lawrence's work took him frequently into the field, Wisconsin, Minnesota, and eventually Montana, where contracts with timber and rail companies proved lucrative. Vera managed the household and involved herself in a local literary society. Acquaintances described the marriage as stable, if quiet. There were no children. Whether this was by choice or circumstance is not documented. Ansel Morrow entered their lives through Lawrence. The two had roomed together at Northwestern and maintained a close friendship afterward. Morrow was unmarried, gregarious, well-liked. He had worked alongside Lawrence on several surveys and was regarded as competent and reliable. In letters, Lawrence referred to him as the best companion a man could ask for in rough country. Vera's relationship with Morrow was cordial. In one letter to her cousin Kate, she described him as cheerful to the point of excess, but good-hearted. Lawrence trusts him completely. There is no suggestion of tension or impropriety. Morrow visited the Holcombs' home on occasion, usually in the company of others. He was part of the fabric of their social circle, nothing more. Catherine Drury was Vera's first cousin, the daughter of her mother's younger sister. The two women had been close in childhood, drifting apart as adults due to geography. Kate had remained in Ohio while Vera moved to Chicago, but renewing their bond through correspondence in the late 1890s, Kate was described by those who knew her as lively, curious, and restless. She had taught school briefly, but found it stifling. She had been engaged once, but the engagement dissolved. She wanted, as she put it in a letter, to see something of the world before it all becomes railway schedules and phonograph parlors. When Lawrence proposed the Montana expedition, he suggested they invite Kate. Vera agreed enthusiastically. "She needs this," Vera wrote to her cousin, "and I would like the company. Lawrence and Ansel will be occupied with their instruments and their maps. We will have each other." Kate arrived in Chicago in late August 1902. She stayed with the Holcombs for a week before they departed. A neighbor, Mrs. Eliza Crenshaw, later recalled seeing the two women on the porch one evening, laughing over something in a book. "They looked easy together," Crenshaw said, "like sisters." The four traveled by rail to Missoula and then by hired wagon to Stevensville. Descriptions of the journey, pieced together from Lawrence's field notes and Kate's letters, suggest a mood of anticipation. Lawrence was focused on the work ahead, but also eager to show Vera the landscape he had come to admire. Ansel was in high spirits, joking with the driver, entertaining Kate with stories of past expeditions. Vera and Kate occupied themselves with books and observation, delighting in the unfamiliar terrain. In Stevensville, they lodged at the hotel and spent 2 days finalizing preparations. They purchased additional supplies, reviewed maps with a local outfitter, and attended a Sunday service at the request of Vera, who wished, she said, to begin properly. A photograph was taken on the morning of September 2nd in front of the outfitter's shop. It is the only known image of the four together. Lawrence stands in the center, one hand on Vera's shoulder, the other holding a coiled rope. Ansel is to his left, arms crossed, grinning at the camera. Kate stands beside Vera, their arms linked. Vera is not smiling, but her expression is open, unguarded. She looks directly at the lens. They departed the following morning, September 3rd, heading west into the Bitterroots. Contemporary accounts suggest the route was well established, if challenging. The plan was to follow a series of ridges and valleys, moving northwest before looping back. Lawrence's contract required him to document specific landmarks and assess accessibility for future logging operations. The work would be tedious but not dangerous. The weather forecast was favorable. The outfitter who sold them provisions, a man named Clayton Hess, testified later that he saw no cause for concern. They were well supplied, and Mr. Holcomb knew his business. The last confirmed sighting of the group came on the evening of September 4th, when they made camp near a creek bed known locally as Tin Cup Draw. A trapper named Eugene Fairchild encountered them while checking his lines. He shared coffee with them and later recalled the interaction in testimony. They were in good spirits. The women were tired but not complaining. Morrow was making a joke about something. I forget what. Holcomb was bent over his maps. I remember Mrs. Holcomb, Vera. She asked me about the best route to a ridge she could see to the north. I told her it was accessible but steep. She thanked me and said she wanted to see the view. I told them all to watch for weather. They said they would. Fairchild left the following morning. He never saw them again. No other witness reported contact with the party after that. Search teams would later locate 3 campsites, including Tin Cup Draw, but the progression was fragmented. Supplies were found scattered, evidently abandoned in haste, but no coherent trail emerged. Before the event, they were 4 people bound by affection, routine, and trust. Lawrence relied on Ansel. Vera cherished Kate. The men respected the women's capability. The women trusted the men's judgment. There is no documented conflict, no simmering resentment, no warning sign, and yet within 10 days, 3 of them were gone, and Vera could not say why. The reconstruction of what happened between September 5th and September 14th, 1902, is an exercise in negative space. It is built not from what is known, but from what remains. Scattered evidence, conjecture, and the absence of Vera Holcomb's voice. The search parties, active from mid-September through early October, documented their findings meticulously. Sheriff Enderlin's reports, supplemented by notes from volunteer searchers and the tracker Peter Big Crane, provide a fragmentary map of the expedition's final days. The campsite at Tin Cup Draw was found intact and orderly. Fire ring, cleared ground, no signs of disturbance. From there, the trail moves northwest, consistent with Lawrence's intended route. A second campsite, approximately 6 miles distant, was located near a rock overhang. Personal items were recovered here: a wool blanket, a tin cup engraved with Ansel Morrow's initials, a leather satchel containing Lawrence's surveying notes. The notes ended abruptly on September 6th. The final entry read, "Grade steeper than anticipated. Will adjust course tomorrow. A. M. suggests higher route. V. agrees. C. tired, but well." The third campsite was the most troubling. It was found in a narrow ravine, heavily forested, 3 miles west of the second site, but at a significantly lower elevation, a deviation from the planned route. The camp was in disarray, supplies scattered, a pack torn open, contents strewn across the ground. No fire ring, no bedding arranged. The scene suggested panic or haste. Peter Big Crane, in his testimony, noted, "Someone left in a hurry, someone else stayed. 2 different actions." Among the scattered items, a woman's boot, identified later as belonging to Kate Drury, a canteen, still half full, a hunting knife, sheathed, lying on the ground, and a small leather-bound journal, also belonging to Kate. The journal was entered into evidence and later returned to her family. Most entries are routine observations, descriptions of landscape, notes on weather, small personal reflections. The final entry is dated September 8th. "We have come down into a place I do not recognize. Lawrence is uncertain but will not say so. Ansel is confident. As always, Vera is quiet. I am cold. The trees here are too close together. I will be glad to be higher again tomorrow." There is no entry for September 9th or after. The knife troubled investigators. It had belonged to Lawrence. Why was it on the ground, sheathed, unused? Efforts to track the party beyond the ravine proved inconclusive. Big Crane identified what he believed to be a trail leading east, back towards Stevensville, but it was faint and interrupted by rocky terrain. He also found signs of passage leading north, deeper into the mountains. But again, the trail dissolved. No human remains were discovered. In November, after the first heavy snows, a hunter named Thomas Albright reported finding fabric snagged on a branch near a rockslide, approximately 5 miles north of the ravine. The fabric was later identified as consistent with the type of coat Ansel Morrow had been wearing. The location was treacherous, prone to slides, difficult to access. A recovery team investigated but found nothing else. Theories proliferated. Accident, a fall, an injury, disorientation. But why were 3 lost and 1 spared? Why would Vera abandon the injured? Or, if they were already dead, why the silence? Animal attack. Unlikely. No blood. No evidence of predation. Big Crane dismissed the idea outright. Exposure and separation. Plausible. If the group became separated in rough country, individuals could have succumbed to cold or exhaustion. But again, why wouldn't Vera lead rescuers to the bodies? Violence. Sheriff Enderlin considered it. Could there have been a confrontation? An argument that escalated? Vera showed no signs of defensive wounds. The knife was sheathed. There was no evidence of a struggle. The scenario that haunted investigators was this: a decision. Something happened that required a choice, and Vera was the one who made it, or survived it. One report, buried in the county archives and rarely cited, contains a statement from a man named Jacob Ryerson, a logger who had worked the Bitterroots for 20 years. Ryerson told Endelin, "People don't disappear 3 at once unless something made them separate on purpose. You get hurt, you stay together. You get lost, you stay together. The only time you split up is when you think it'll save someone." When asked to elaborate, Ryerson said, "Maybe they thought she had the best chance. Maybe she was sent for help. Maybe the others stayed behind and didn't make it. But if that's what happened, she'd say so. She'd tell us where to find them. Unless she couldn't, or unless telling would reveal something worse than not knowing." The last confirmed sighting of the 4 together was Eugene Fairchild's encounter at Tin Cup Draw, the evening of September 4th. Vera had asked about the northern ridge. Fairchild had said it was steep. She had wanted to see the view. 9 days later, she walked out alone. The geography offers clues but no answers. The distance from the ravine campsite to Stevensville, following the most direct route, is roughly 18 miles. Difficult but not impossible, even for someone without supplies. Vera's physical condition upon her return, malnourished, exhausted but largely uninjured, suggests she had been moving steadily for several days. Had she been moving alone the entire time? Or had she left the others only recently? One detail, small but persistent in the depositions, her coat. It was a man's coat. Heavy wool, too large for her. It had not been among the expedition's inventories, so far as anyone could determine. Where had she gotten it? When Dr. Pelletier asked her, she looked at him and then looked away. The separation, whenever it occurred, however it occurred, left 3 people in the mountains and 1 on the trail to town. The 3 were never seen again. The 1 would never explain. Years later, in 1931, a forestry crew working in the region found skeletal remains near a collapsed tree, approximately 12 miles northwest of the ravine campsite. The remains were incomplete, scattered, likely disturbed by animals over decades. No identification was possible. The bones were catalogued and stored. In 1958, they were inadvertently destroyed in a records facility fire. They might have been Lawrence, or Ansel, or Kate, or a stranger. Or no one connected to the Holcomb expedition at all. No other remains have been found. The separation, then, is not a moment that can be reconstructed. It is a void, a space where 4 people became one, and the one chose silence. The pressure on Vera Holcomb to speak began immediately, and did not relent for years. In the weeks following her return, Stevensville became a locus of scrutiny. Journalists arrived from Missoula, Helena, even Spokane. The story had the elements editors craved: wilderness, mystery, a lone woman survivor, and wealthy families demanding answers. Headlines ranged from the sensational, "Woman emerges from Death Valley, companions lost," to the accusatory, "Sole survivor refuses to aid search." Vera was not formally detained, but her movements were constrained. Sheriff Endelin requested she remain available for questioning. The Holcomb family, through their attorney, a man named Charles Wickham, applied legal pressure of a different sort. They wanted her deposed under oath. They wanted access to any correspondence, any documentation. They intimated, without stating directly, that her inheritance from Lawrence's estate might be contingent on cooperation. She provided nothing. On October 3, 1902, a coroner's inquest was convened in Stevensville. Vera was summoned to testify. The proceedings, preserved in transcript, are remarkable for their brevity and her intransigence. Coroner: "Mrs. Holcomb, you understand that you are under oath?" Vera Holcomb: "I do." Coroner: "Will you describe for this panel the events that occurred between September 4th and September 14th of this year?" Vera Holcomb: "No." Coroner: "I must insist." Vera Holcomb: "I will not." Coroner: "Mrs. Holcomb, 3 individuals are missing. Your husband among them. You are the only person who can help us understand what happened." Vera Holcomb: "No response." Coroner: "Do you know where they are?" Vera Holcomb: "No." Coroner: "Do you know what happened to them?" Vera Holcomb: Pause. "I cannot help you." Coroner: "Cannot or will not?" Vera Holcomb: "Both." The inquest produced no finding, insufficient evidence. No determination of death could be made without bodies. Lawrence, Ansel, and Kate were classified as missing. The case remained open. Vera left Montana on October 28th, accompanied by a nurse named Mrs. Harriet Gould, hired by the Holcomb family. In a letter to her employer, Mrs. Gould described Vera as docile but distant. She eats little, sleeps poorly, and weeps only when she believes herself alone. I asked her once if she wished to speak to a pastor. She said no. I asked if she wished to write to her family. She said there was nothing to write. In Chicago, Vera was installed in a small apartment funded by the Holcomb estate. The family's attorney, Wickham, made several attempts to interview her. She refused to see him. Lawrence's brother, William, tried once more to extract answers. She would not open the door. In December 1902, Kate Drury's mother, Eleanor, wrote to Vera. The letter, preserved among Eleanor's papers, reads in part, "I do not write to accuse. I write because I am a mother who has lost her daughter, and I believe you know something that could give me peace. If Kate suffered, I wish to know. If she is buried somewhere, I wish to bring her home. If you witnessed her final moments, I beg you to tell me what they were. Silence is a kind of cruelty I did not think you capable of." Vera responded with a single sentence, handwritten, "I am sorry." Eleanor Drury would visit Chicago in 1903, 1905, and 1908, each time requesting a meeting. Vera granted one in 1905. They sat in a tea room on State Street. Eleanor asked questions. Vera wept but did not answer. The meeting lasted less than 20 minutes. Eleanor died in 1912, her daughter's fate unresolved. The Holcomb family, for their part, grew increasingly hostile. They contested Vera's right to Lawrence's estate, arguing that her refusal to cooperate constituted abandonment of her marital duties. The legal challenge was unsuccessful. Illinois law required evidence of wrongdoing, and there was none. Vera retained access to the trust, though relations with Lawrence's family ceased entirely. In 1904, a private investigator named Raymond Kessler was hired by Ansel Morrow's father, a physician in Evanston. Kessler traveled to Montana, re-interviewed witnesses, examined the evidence, and followed leads into the mountains. He produced a lengthy report concluding, "Mrs. Holcomb is the only person with knowledge of the events in question. Her refusal to speak suggests either trauma-induced mutism or deliberate concealment. I find no evidence of criminality, but I also find her behavior impossible to reconcile with innocence as commonly understood." The report recommended continued pressure. Morrow's father declined. He told Kessler, "If she won't speak, she won't speak. I have no son either way." The social cost to Vera was severe. She was shunned by the circles she and Lawrence had once moved in. Invitations ceased. Acquaintances crossed the street. A notice in the Chicago Tribune in 1906, covering a literary society event, listed past members and noted, "Mrs. V. Holcomb, formerly active, no longer participates. She worked, as mentioned, in modest positions, a seamstress, a file clerk." Employers who knew her history generally did not retain her long. Not because she was incompetent, she was described as meticulous and reliable, but because her presence unsettled people. A supervisor at the insurance office, in a letter to a colleague in 1918, wrote, "Mrs. Holcomb is entirely professional, but there is something in her manner that makes conversation difficult. She seems always to be carrying a great weight. The other girls do not warm to her." In 1910, a woman named Margaret Schuyler, a reformer involved in supporting women in distress, reached out to Vera through a mutual acquaintance. Schuyler believed Vera might have been the victim of some trauma, assault, coercion, and that shame prevented her from speaking. She offered confidential support. Vera met with her once. Schuyler later wrote in her diary, "She is not broken in the way I expected. She is whole, but walled. I asked if someone had hurt her. She said no. I asked if she was afraid. She said, not anymore. I asked what she was protecting. She stood and left." Journalists periodically attempted to revive the story. In 1920, a writer for Collier's sought an interview. Vera declined. In 1929, a true crime author named Douglas Finch included the case in a book titled Vanished Without Trace. He speculated that Vera had killed the others in a fit of madness and suppressed the memory. The book was poorly received. Vera did not respond. In 1937, as noted, Leonard Voss of the Saturday Evening Post tracked her down. His account of their brief meeting includes this observation. She did not seem evasive. She seemed resolved, as though she had made a decision long ago and intended to honor it, regardless of cost. The cost was isolation. Vera lived alone, worked alone, and died alone. But the isolation was not passive. It was maintained. She did not avoid the world out of fear or incapacity. She avoided it because speaking, truly speaking, would have required her to break something she had decided must remain intact. One neighbor, a woman named Clara Dietrich, lived in the same building as Vera from 1935 until Vera's death. In an interview conducted in 1950 by a local historian, Dietrich said, "She was kind, quiet, but kind. She helped me once when my husband was ill. She sat with him so I could rest. I thanked her and said I didn't know how to repay her. She said, 'You don't owe me anything.' I asked her just once about what happened in Montana. She looked at me and said, 'It was a long time ago.' I said, 'But don't you want people to know?' She said, 'No.' The pressure to speak, then, was both external and internal. And the internal, one suspects, was the heavier burden. Vera Holcomb carried it for 41 years. In the study of historical mysteries, there is a tendency to seek resolution. The archive demands it. The narrative expects it. But some silences are not puzzles to be solved. They are choices to be respected, however much they unsettle us. Vera Holcomb's silence was not the silence of trauma, though trauma surely played a role. It was not the silence of guilt, though guilt may have been present. It was the silence of someone who had decided that certain knowledge, once released, would do more harm than good, and who bore the cost of that decision herself. The historian's task, then, is not to break the silence, but to understand its shape. Consider what is known. Vera was physically capable of speech. She answered direct questions when they concerned practical matters. She could write. Her brief letters, her note to Eleanor Drury, her inscription on the photograph. She was not catatonic. She was not incapacitated. She was deliberate. Consider also the timing. She never varied. From the moment she returned in 1902 until her death in 1943, she maintained the same position. This was not a silence born of confusion or uncertainty. It was a line she drew and never crossed. What could compel such consistency? One possibility. She made a promise. To whom is unclear. Perhaps to one of the others, in their final moments. Perhaps to herself. A promise that speaking would betray something sacred, some final intimacy or agreement. Another possibility. She believed that the truth would destroy what remained. Families want answers, but not all answers bring peace. If what happened in the Bitterroots involved a choice, who would live, who would stay, who would go, then the details might only deepen the grief. Better to let the lost remain lost, undefined, than to burden the living with unbearable specifics. A third possibility. The truth implicated her in a way she could not reconcile with the life she hoped to live afterward. Not criminally, but morally. Perhaps she made a decision, a necessary decision, even a correct one, that she nonetheless could not justify aloud. And so she bore it silently, accepting isolation as the price. Or perhaps it was simpler. Perhaps she knew that no explanation would satisfy, that the living demand answers not to understand, but to assign, to place blame, or to locate meaning, or to construct a narrative that makes the random feel purposeful. And Vera, having lived through whatever occurred, understood that the event resisted narrative. It simply was, and saying so would help no one. The evidence, such as it is, supports none of these theories conclusively, and that is the point. What can be said with confidence is this: Vera Holcomb returned. She could have invented a story. Accident, animal, storm. She could have lied, and the lie would have been unverifiable. Instead, she said nothing. She endured suspicion, hostility, and grief, and still she said nothing. That suggests the silence mattered to her more than her reputation, more than her relationships, more than comfort. In the decades since her death, occasional efforts have been made to solve the case through other means. In 1965, a team of amateur historians used Lawrence's surveying notes to retrace the route, hoping to locate remains. They found nothing. In 1982, a journalist named Paula Ingram filed Freedom of Information requests for any federal records related to the case. None existed. In 1998, a true crime podcast devoted an episode to the disappearance. The host concluded, "We'll probably never know." He was right. But the not knowing is not a failure. It is Vera's legacy. She returned from the mountains with a secret, and she kept it. Not because she was weak, not because she was cruel, but because she believed, rightly or wrongly, that the secret was not hers to tell. The photograph remains, 4 people, standing in the sun, linked by affection and trust. Vera's handwriting on the back. We were happy. Past tense. A statement of fact. Not longing. They were happy, and then they were not. And whatever happened in between belonged to them, and to her, and to no one else. The silence then was not an evasion. It was a form of protection, of whom or of what we cannot know. But it was intentional, it was sustained, and it was, in its way, an act of fidelity. Vera Holcomb walked out of the Bitterroot Mountains alone. She carried the others with her for the rest of her life, in the only way she could, by saying nothing. And perhaps that was the kindest thing she could have done.